With Donor Management How-To Webcast, Processing Donations with Don Mann. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Amaritas and I'm from ASI Asia Pacific and I'm your host today. Before I hand over to our presenter, there's just a few housekeeping matters I'd like to run through. There's a control panel on the right side of your viewer window. You can close and open the control panel by clicking on the orange Grab tab arrows. If you have any questions, please submit them using the question pane in the control panel. Just type your question in the box provided and click on the send button. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation, but you can submit them at any time. Just also note that the phones are muted, so we encourage you to use the question pane to ask any questions that you may have. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Gary Lincoln. Gary is a Senior Technical Support Consultant here at ASI Asia Pacific, and he will be taking you through today's webcast on processing donations with Don Mann. I'll now hand over to Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. What we're going to look at today, I'm Gary, by the way. What we're going to look at today is the sort of basics of the processing payments and different sorts of payments and some of the common things that people tend to get stuck on. Okay, so if I'll just go in at the moment. Okay, so to start processing the payments, on the Start menu, you'll see the Donation Processing button up the top. And from there, it basically takes us into the menu where we've got all of our items to do with the processing itself. For most organisations, your menu will look similar to this, although you may do different things with credit cards or have reports, etc., that have been generated. So you may have more items than this, but this will be absolutely the minimum that you've got. If we go into Record Donations, okay, so in this case it's saying, are we entering a new batch? So a new batch is any time we've got new payments to process. You can, at any one time, have more than one person entering a batch, but when we sort of get to the stage of starting to do the banking and receipting, etc., only one person can do that from all the batches that have been entered by other users. So if I say yes, the system will give me the batch number, and from there, by default, it's got just above where the cursor is at the moment, it's got either a D for donations, which is primarily the main sort of processing that we're doing, but you can also do an in-kind batch. If you're processing an in-kind batch, the system by default won't allow you to put the dollar amount in. Okay, so in this case, I'll just process a donation batch. So if I said I've got 4 payments to do, so with your payments, basically tally them up into a number that's manageable for yourself. So if you had 100 donations, the last thing really you want to do is process the whole 100 donations in one batch to find that there's an error, because now you've got 100 transactions to look through to find the error and go and fix it. So you can have as many batches as you need to. It's not the same as when you talk to an accountant and they'll say a batch is basically a whole day's processing. So really in donor management, the batch is there just to help you do the actual management of the processing. So in this case, I've got 4 payments to do, and I'm going to put $230 to be banked, which will be made up of things like cash, checks, credit cards, etc. like that. I can also at this time put in money as pre-banked, and that's anything that is already at the bank account that I need to record and receipt, or if I've had a reversal or something like that, then that's also treated as pre-banked money. So in this case, I'm going to put in that I've got $200 pre-banked. The next question down means if I've updated the mail history for my donors and I'm running a campaign at the moment, the system will then say, do you want to default the campaign to the last mail code? If I say yes, that will make the campaign code on the processing screen the default based on what the person was last mailed. So when you've just had an appeal, and you might even have a few segments of that appeal, that will make it much easier for the person doing the entry, because they then don't have to concentrate on changing the campaign all the time, or even batching the donations for one campaign. Okay. By default, it'll put your operator code in because you've logged into Don Mann. From there, I've got the blank donor screen. So if you're processing payments and you've got a record where the person isn't on your database at the moment, you can just enter and start creating a new record, the same as you would do on the donor entry screen. Okay. So from there, I'd find my donor either by name or number. That's for normal. So if I've had some slip go out where it's actually got the donor number on it coming back, then that makes it much easier because I can just enter the number and bring up the person's record. If not, of course, I can go down to multi-find and search for the person this way and double-click. And so either way, you'll get pretty much to the same record. By default, for most systems when I'm processing, the default setting is to automatically jump to the bottom of the screen when I'm processing donations. So if I've found a record via multi-find or via the donor number, it skips all the fields because unless there's something to change, I don't need to change anything. I can just enter. If there is, you can always just click into the field and change whatever it is you need to. Okay, in this case, I'll say, no, I haven't got anything to change. If I enter, it will then take me and show me the second screen of the person's donations. Donation history, sorry, at the bottom. Most of the details on this screen are updated by the system depending on interaction that we have with them. There is a refer to code, appointments, etc. But the details from where it's got bank and branch, over here it's got bank and branch. Whether you put them in like they are showing here, as normally that would be NAV, but you'd have a Westpac or whatever the big banks were, and then a branch. But most people tend to find it much easier just to put the BSB number. But you don't have to do it on this screen. When you do it on the processing screen, the system will save that back to the person's record. So if they pay by check next time, those details will already be there. For people that have been using the system for a while will know that we used to also do that with credit card numbers, but that's something that we can't do anymore. Okay, so in this case, I just enter, and that will take me into the processing screen. Okay, at the top, you'll see your batch number. The number entered so far is none, and it's telling me that there's 4 left to enter. So if you're never sure, just look at the very top of that screen, and that'll show you where you are as far as your status of working through your batch. It's also got the donor number and the name of the person, or in the case of a company, you'll have the company name up there. The donation date by default will show us today's date, but you can change it. Primarily 2 dates stored in the system. One is what you put as the donation date, and the other one is the date that the transaction or the donation is actually saved into the system. Okay? So come the first week of July where we might be behind and we're trying to process payments and people are asking for it to be processed as per 30th of June for tax purposes, then you can change the details here, but the system will show later that you've actually processed it on the 1st or 2nd of July. Okay. From there, I then put in the total of my transaction. Okay. And then from there I can have a number of paths, which means if this person has given me $100 and said, can $50 be for one purpose and $50 for another, and at the top of the screen, if I say there's going to be 2 paths, you'll now see down the bottom of the screen here, I've got 2 places to actually split the donation internally. For most payments, if I keep it simple for this one, we'll just say it's a single part, and from there I have all of the different pay methods that I can utilize within DOMN. The majority of the pay methods have a shortcut key. If, in this case, I do Q for check, that will put the whole word of check in. And you can now see it's pulled up the bank and branch details that were stored on the person's record before. So if I said, no, I don't want to use that, I want to use, and I'll just use a bogus BSB, of course, if I just do 2, so that's much easier to type in, and I'm always going to be 100% accurate, as opposed to, things like Westpac where people put WPC or WES or WVC. There's just too many different variations that people will put in. Whereas if you use the BSB, even if it's a small community-based bank or credit union that's associated with one of the major banks, the BSB will always point to that being the actual institution that the money is coming from. From there, the drawer name. If the drawer name was, to chance, a joint account, and they said, well, that's not going to be just Mr.'s, it must be B and okay, so it may be something like that. So just change the drawer name to suit what's actually on the check. From there, it's then saying, because I've put in the pay method of a check, by default the system will say, yes, I need to bank that. And from there, do I need to receipt? And do I need to refer to? Okay, so the refer to is more to do with if I had a bequest officer or I had a staff member that was looking after a certain group of people, etc. Normally this field will, by default, will pre-fill based on what there is on the donor's record. If not, if it was a really high one or I wanted to refer it, say, to the bequest officer, then I could choose that code from the drop-down list. For this one, I'm going to say, no, that's not necessary for what I want. Okay. Extra remarks is something that not a lot of people do use or even know that it's there because they just skip over the screen. But if I say yes and enter, that will pop up a little notepad here, and whatever I type into this particular screen will come out into a field called Note that I can use when I'm doing my mail merging. So, someone had written a nice letter, or we'd had a phone conversation or something, and I wanted to personalize their receipt letter, then I could put in a PS, thanks for the letter or whatever it may be, and that can become part of that person's receipt and their letter in order to make it just a little bit more customized for that person. Okay. The coupon code where I've stopped at the moment, some people will have, and it may be used or called a different name on the screen, but it's basically a field that is in the screen that I can use to allocate or put a different code onto particular donations so that I can report on that later. So if I wanted to know all of my inline donations or something like that, despite which campaign it was in, then I could use this code to do that. It's also useful in the case of if I've done advertising in different magazines, per se, and I said I've got one campaign code, but I want to know which coupon or which slip the actual donation came in from, then I can create my own list of codes in there and use that at the time I'm processing. And later on I can say, for that campaign, I now want to do a breakdown on those coupon codes, or in the system it's actually called donation type. Okay. By default, because there's no receipt name on this particular one, the system will generate the receipt name automatically. But again, if the record was a Mr. and Mrs. record and they've indicated that they only want one of the two people to be on the receipt, then you can also click up here and just change the receipt name to suit. Okay, in this particular case, the receipt name is fine. Because at the top of the screen I said there's going to be one part of the gift, the system has put the whole part in here. From there, I could fund my campaign. Okay. The system should automatically then pick up the ledger code, the letter code, and the bank account, because these details should be predefined in the campaign code itself. So if for some reason you get to one of these fields and it's not showing the code, means that the campaign record itself hasn't been set up correctly. So we would then have to go back to the campaign, fix that so that future processing would pick those details up. So really, the better I can set up my campaigns, the less things are going to sort of go wrong here, because everything should be predefined. Okay. From there, again, the next field here, the region code, is something that some people do utilize and that other organizations don't. Where I can use it, in this case it's being used as a geographic region, but I can use it for other things, and it's one of the few fields that I can pass automatically from the donor's record to the processing. So at the time that I process the payment, I can have something extra broken down on those. So if I have got geographic regions, and I then wanted later to say, well, let's do a report on this campaign, and I want to get a breakdown of which region supported me better. So I can certainly utilize it for that. Okay. If I've got a relationship link between this donor and another donor on the system, and I've got the soft credits turned on in the system will then stop me into this field here, where I can then soft credit a donation to another donor. So this is very handy and quite often utilized when we're doing things like Everyday Hero. The system will do that automatically when we import that data. But it's also useful in the case of things like payroll giving, where I might have the employees, and if I can then create a record for the company, a record in order to do a soft credit from the employee to the company. So later on I can see how much under that company's record has been soft credited, which will show me how much the employees have given, because otherwise it's a little bit hard to tie them together. So if I put that in, the system will then come up with a donation comment line. There are 9 lines on this screen because theoretically in the system the maximum parts that you can split a payment into is 9 parts. So at the top here, if I said 9, I could then put a comment for every single part of that transaction. In this case I've only got the one, and it's a fairly straightforward transaction. I don't need to write anything. But in the case of things like gifts in kind or reversals or things like that, the comment is really handy to put something in there so that when you look at the transactions later, it'll remind you or anyone else looking at it why that particular payment was reversed. Because it might be, we put money into the wrong campaign or a wrong ledger code, or it might have even gone to the wrong donor. But they're the sort of things that are very hard to remember, 6 months down the track. In this case, I've got nothing, so if I just enter through, it'll then come up and say $100 for Mr. Brown, enter, and then I keep going through the cycle. So if I just put in a couple more transactions, I'll find some more donors. Okay, so in this case, they've given me, see, so if I do V for Visa, it'll then not take me across to the bank and branch details as it did when I did check, but it's now taking me down saying what's the drawer name on the credit card, or based on the form that I've got. And from there, it'll then say, do you want to edit the card details? So if I put in a number here, put in the expiry date. Okay. By default, the order type over here is M, which is a mailing. Okay. The only way you'll get a for auto is if I run an auto deduction batch. If perchance this person has given me, a few $1,000s on their credit card, and I said, well, that's higher than I can just accept. I have to ring up and get an authorization number for that. Then that's where the system stopped me at the moment. And from what I've received from the bank, I could then type in the authorization number. Okay. Again, by default, because it's a Visa card in this case, the system has said, yes, I want to bank that money. Yes, I want to receipt it. And the rest of it, if I go through, will be pretty much the same. Difference in this case, because I've got the gateway turned on, and it's just a trial gateway, but it's basically showed me that little screen saying it's now sending the details to the gateway, and the system by default will change the pay method from Visa to gateway, so that later on we can know that this, exactly how this money was transferred into the bank account. From there, it's fairly much the same. And so I go through, put in my next transaction. Okay, and this time I'll do C for cash. And it's now skipping both of the previous two parts of the screen where it's not going into the bank or branch or going into the drawer name. Okay. The fact that the field still says edit credit card, yes or no, is irrelevant because it's not jumping into that field now. But again, it's got bank yes, receipt yes, etc. If perchance I had money that I needed to reverse and put back in again, I could still say that the money was originally paid by cash, but you can then just say, no, I don't need to bank it here. And that will, by default, treat that as pre-banked money. Of course, I have to make sure that when you do the batch initially, that I've totaled the amount and put it there as pre-banked, otherwise I'm going to get an error at the end of my batch to say what I said I was going to enter, I certainly didn't enter. If we just save this one, okay, and one more to go. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to use the pay method of direct, which if I type DD for direct debit, will change the pay method to direct, and yet now you can see that by default, the system has said banking no. So that's why on my previous screen where I did the batch, I said I've also got pre-bank money that I'm entering. From there, I can still receipt the money and do everything else as per normal. But in this case, I'm just saying it doesn't need to be banked. It's basically at the bank account or in the bank account already. I just need to record it through the system. Okay, so once I get to the end of my batch, I'll get to this screen saying the number of transactions have been reached. So this is where normally you just enter or click on the button, and the system will then hopefully not show you a screen like this. So what it's telling me, is that the transactions to be banked by you is $180, but what I said on my batch screen was $170. Okay. So if perchance I said, oh, I don't know what's wrong, just enter there, and on that screen it was basically indicating my first port of call after I get an error like that should be to go across here into donation troubleshooting, And the very first option on that particular menu is print a batch listing. By default, this program is set to print only open batches. So even if I had 4 or 5 or more batches previously that did close and everything's right, I'd normally only do this for an open batch. In this case, I can leave that, and I then don't need to worry about the particular batch number. If perchance I did have multiple people entering batches, I would then put in the number for my batch because I don't need the listing for everyone else's. So in this case, I'm the only person entering, so I can enter through. And in this case, we just do print preview. Okay. So when the report comes up, it's now showing me the donor numbers, the amounts, all of the details that I've processed in the payment, and this is the report that I would then use to go through and physically check where the error was. Yeah? So the two places the error will occur is either I've just totaled it up wrong when I've done the initial adding up to the batch, and if that's the case, I can go back and I'll show you how we can basically go back and close the batch. If not, I then look at this and go, okay, I've got $80 for this person, I've got $100, so I'd go through and check what I had, $200, and in this case I've got a pre-banked amount of $60, which originally should have been a banked amount. Okay. That's then indicated by the bank yes or no column over the right here, and the system by default will show them into the 2 different columns for me. So if perchance I said, oh, this particular one here is what has changed, but what I need to do is look across and see how this one was actually paid. So on the screen it's showing me that originally it was a banked one on my batch, so that should have been right, but the system now has processed that payment and it's now changed that to gateway. Yeah. So sometimes you can sort of just look at the first couple of columns and get caught up on that, but you really need to look at how the payment's gone through and everything else in order to try and figure out what has actually gone wrong with the batch. In this particular case, if I said this first transaction I put in here for $80 should have been $60 and I've just done a typo, then what I need to do is go back into the batch, which we'll do now, and I'll show you how we can then find that transaction and change what we need to in order to get the batch to balance. If we get out of our batch screen, go back to home, and you can see record donations is in red on the menu, which is indicating that that's the step that I'm at the moment. Oops. So I don't close the screen, of course. Now you won't get this little screen because your gateway won't be in test mode. So in this case I'll say, no, I'm not starting a new batch. The system then comes up and says, I've got one open batch, 104. But again, as I said, I could have other people entering batches, so I would then put in the number for the batches I'm working on, and the system will then tell me what has been entered so far. So if I said, what I need to do is change this total here. Okay. So what I do is, from my batch listing, look up the donor number and change what I need to on this screen to suit. If perchance I had made the error initially, so when I've actually totaled the batch up, I've made the error at that point, then I could say, look, I've checked everything, there are 4 transactions, $180 to be banked, $260 pre-banked, and that is correct. Then I can put those numbers on the screen and close the batch as it is. So it's really just a matter of what it is that's gone wrong at the time that the batch hasn't closed for one reason or another. So in this case, the number of transactions is still correct. So I said there's 4 transactions. So if I said I'm going to do 160 to be banked and 260 pre-banked, the system will then come up with that screen to say the number of donations has been reached. Out of habit, lots of people just enter here, and that means I've just gone in a big circle because I'm going to get back to that error message to say my batch doesn't close. Okay. So you may do that a couple of times before you go, hang on, I've got to stop here and say, no, I don't want to close the batch. Okay. That will then put me onto the donor record. From my batch listing, I would have had my donor number, so I don't need to look them up by name. If I just enter, it will take me through the person's record. When I get to this screen here, because the date is there already, if I push the F3 key, we'll find the transaction details. If perchance for some reason you've changed the date because you're backdating stuff or whatever, just change the date on the screen, but don't enter, and then push F3. Worst case scenario, you can page up and down through the transactions, but it does get a little bit messy because you have to keep an eye on which donor number it is at the top to make sure that you don't change an incorrect transaction. So in this case, I've got the right transaction and the right person, so I'm saying what that should have been was $60, not $80, and everything else about it is correct. So if I just enter through, the system then will change the amount down here because I've now changed it at the top of the screen and there is only one part to the payment. Yeah. So if we go through, yes, and now I'm getting back to the message saying the number of transactions have been reached. Do I want to check and close? So if I say yes, the system's now saying, okay, that's fine. Those 4 donations totaled exactly what I said they were going to total. It may work out that somewhere in the process you might get to the banking and then discover there's an error, or even your ledger report. If that were to happen, the system will basically take me through. So right at the bottom of the screen here, it's got under the diary, open file buttons, etc. It'll have progress, and this will show me which part of the processing I'm actually at. In order to follow that as far as the menu, if I go into donation troubleshooting again, you'll see modify system progress. And these basically are the major steps. So basically, donations is doing my entries, the banking, the credit card listings, the mail merge for the receipts. Pledges, not many people use unless you're really doing purely sort of membership stuff. You might do a special pledge receipt. But then the ledger, refer to, and the end-of-day update report. So if by chance I got to the point and said, oh, say I'm at the ledger stage or anything like that, and said I still need to now go and open that batch, under donation troubleshooting, I can go into open a closed batch. In this case, batch 104. I don't want to open another batch, and I do by default want to set the system progress back to donations, because if I've gone past donations and as I said I've done the banking or even up to the ledger report and I've then discovered the error, I have to force the system to go back to the donation stage in order to get back to the batch. So that means if I now go back into processing, record donations, so now I'm not starting a new batch, I can then pick up the batch again and change any details I want to. So even at this point, if I've processed the batch and somebody's just come in and said, oh look, we've just received another donation or something, you could either do 2 things. You can just start a new batch and just put the one transaction in because it really doesn't matter, or you can open the batch again and go and say, well, now there's going to be 5 transactions in here. Okay. So in this case, I'll leave the number as it is. No, what I'll do, I'll actually take one of these transactions out of the system. So again, if I've made a mistake and I said, well, no, in this case, there's something wrong. I've started processing a credit card, but when I've looked at it later, there was no expiry date, or there's something wrong with the transaction. And really, until I can figure that out, I just need to delete that transaction. So the first part of the process is very similar to what we did to find the transaction and do the editing. But in this case, if I said, no, in this case, I'm going to have 3 transactions. So I'm removing one of the transactions. I'm going to have $100 to be banked and $260 pre-banked. Okay, so I've now changed the total to suit what it needs to suit. Okay. So again, I'm getting to this screen saying the number of donations. So I'd say, no, I'm not checking the batch because I know that there's an error. There's something I have to fix. So again, if I go into the donor from my batch listing that I've got previously to say, okay, this is the donor that I need to either remove the transaction or edit. Go through. Again, on the third screen, if I push F3, we'll bring up the transaction. And in this case, I need to delete this transaction, not just change something about it like I did last time. So in order to delete, everywhere in DonMan, the delete combination is Shift and F6, which if everyone's got one of the templates that go on the keyboard, you'll see that key combination on there. So that will then bring up this screen to say the delete button's been pressed. Do you want to delete this new donation entry? Yes. And now the system's taking me back to say the number of donations has been reached, or the number of transactions has been reached. So if I say yes, my batch is now closed. with that one less transaction. So they're the two main sort of things for editing a donation. I can do that up to, I can run or open the batch again unless I've done the end-of-day report. Once I've done the end-of-day report, all of the donations in the new donation file will be emptied and updated. So basically the campaign, the donor, the donation, everything will also be updated from those particular transactions. If that were to happen, what I'd have to do is reverse the money. Okay. Reversals can happen in two different mechanisms. One is I've got money that I just need to reverse, so I've got a check, say, that's bounced or something like that, and I just need to take the money out of the system. The other sort of reversal I can do means that I'm taking money out, but I need to correct something about it. So in the case, say, that I put money into an incorrect campaign or anything like that, that would then be a reversal. If I'm doing a transaction or a donation that is a straight reversal, when I do my batch, there'll be one transaction and the original amount will be pre-banked, okay, because the money is already banked for all purposes, or in the system it's been treated as banked. If I'm doing a correction and it's the same amount, so say it's just a $100 donation that I've put into the wrong campaign or the wrong ledger code or whatever it is I need to adjust internally, then I would say there's going to be two transactions and the total pre-bank will then be $200. The reason for this is that when I process the reversal, I can't put a negative value in and have that match a positive value. So I have to put it in at $100 because that was the original transaction, but the pay method that I use on the screen is then reversal. So if we look at something like that, first of all I would go into my donor record and look for a donation to actually reverse out. Okay, so if I've got this donor here and I said, this is very generous, let's not do the $1 one. Okay, so normally you won't have something like this where I've got 2009 and then I've got 2013. There is a date restriction that's been set in most systems, and you can change it yourself, that says how many months in the past that I can process a donation. Because normally it's set at 12 months, and that's really to stop me from accidentally putting in some silly date. If perchance I found a donation that went back to 2009 or something like that that I needed to fix, then I'd have to go into System Defaults and change that setting. So in this case, I'll just escape from there. So if I find a donor, okay, so again, in this case, I've got some old donors because they're right at the start of my file, and the date is 2009. So in this case here, I've got one, but it was a gateway one. When I process a gateway one, if I needed to do a credit back to the person, there is a different pay method, which is a gateway reversal. And what that does is still goes through the gateway, but it actually does a credit to the person's record. Yeah, that's really the only difference from a standard reversal. For a standard reversal, though, we'll just do a dummy one here. So if I go back into Record Donations, get past my message here. So yes, I'm starting a new batch. So in this case, if I said I've got one transaction to do, and it was $100. Okay, so basically I've got a $100 donation that I just need to reverse out of the system. Okay. From there, I would find my donor, and in this case, I haven't got $100 on this, but I'll show you the mechanism for that. So the same as processing it normally. When I get to this screen, though, if you click on the donor history button, you'll see all of the donor's history there. Okay, so then I could go through and say, oh yes, now I've found the donation that I need to reverse. If you double click on that, you'll then get this message to say, do you want to reverse this donation? So if I say yes and go back to the screen, you can see that the pay method is reversal, but everything about the original transaction has been brought up on this screen here. So that makes the actual reversal part of it straightforward. If you're doing a reversal and a correction, out of habit, if you do the reversal first, then the correction, because the donation date will be maintained when you go back to do the correction, because ideally I don't want to change the date of the transaction. I'm changing something internally. If it's really just a check that is bounced or something like that, then yes, it's just the original date, and there's nothing else that's going to be impacted by that anyway. So in this case here, because I've got a date that is so old, if I go through and try and do this, the system will bring up an error message to say the date is less than 12 months in the past. So if by chance I do get something like that, but normally an error will happen, within the year that you're in, or the 12 months that you're in, you'll spot it, because if you go back, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or even further, it's almost irrelevant, because all of the finance reports would have been done, all of the reports out of Donman would have been done in that time, and to now go and change money after the fact is just going to have some sort of flow-on effect in a negative way somewhere else. So if I do have to do something like this, though, and I've got to there, I'm getting that error message, you can get out of the processing. In this case, all I've done, or in this case, I would have lost that batch number. But really, as I said, the batch is there to help you do the actual entry. It's not the most crucial thing about the actual transaction itself. So if I said I need to change that setting, I can then go into Modify History Archive by going through the main menu. I think everyone knows the password for that. Then if I go into Modify System Defaults, the first page that comes up is to do with the defaults on the donor record. So if I push F2, it will take me where I can now see things about the batch and the number of parts of the donation, the current batch number, receipt number, the GST percentage, etc. And you'll notice right in the middle of the screen, it's got don't allow donation if the date is X months in the past. In this case, it's 12. So if I needed to go back, 10 years, 12 years, etc., then I could say, let's put it at 130 months or something. But ideally, once I fix that transaction up, or change what I need to, I should come back and put that back as 12 months. Again, it is there to sort of stop us accidentally putting in some silly date. So now I've changed that setting. I don't need to restart the system at all. I can go back into Record Transactions. Yes. One. Put in my details again. Find my donor. Okay. Again, go through now. And I can say, yes, I want to reverse this transaction. There you go. Because it's 2013. Okay, so I've sort of stuffed myself up. But you can see now that's saying it's less than 130 months in the past. But really, everything else about the reversal itself should be very straightforward. That is the best way to do it. So when you get to this screen, just click on the dollar, find the transaction, okay. Yes, and the system by default will fill out all of the details for you. So you don't need to worry about all of the details in the middle here, because it's nothing to do with banking anymore. As long as the date matches the amount, the reversal, and all of the details of the original transaction. If by chance the original transaction was a split payment, so I put it in 2 parts or 3 parts, each part of that donation is now its own transaction. So you don't have to reverse the whole lot. If you just said, oh, look, I need to move one part of that into a different campaign, you can just edit or reverse that part of the payment and put it back in again. If you're doing a partial reversal, you can't reverse part of it. So say the original was $100, I can't reverse $60 of that and put it somewhere. I'd have to reverse the whole $100 and then put the remainder that should have gone in either as a split donation or back into a different campaign. So it's really just every part of the donation will become its own donation record at the end of the day. So the split on here is really just to help me from doing the entry more than anything else. Okay, so in this case, it's saying the campaign was closed, again, because it's so old. So I will get all sorts of messages about that. When I go into Process, and I click on my list here, so you can see that Dinner 02 doesn't show in my list, and primarily because on the campaign record itself, you do have a start date and an end date. If perchance your campaigns haven't been closed, this list will be exponentially getting longer and longer and longer, which means it's really open for people to make mistakes. So especially if I've got campaigns that are called, very close names like membership, where I might have member 12 and now I've got member 13. Ideally, if member 13 has started, I should close member 12 so that I only have one option on here in order to process that payment. There is a program in the system that allows you to close campaigns in bulk. If perchance you've got a whole lot of campaigns that haven't been closed, it's a really good idea to keep this as your basically active list, just to minimize errors, because there's nothing worse than trying to spend a week trying to report on stuff and finding missing money, only to find out that it's in a campaign that you didn't expect would have had money entered in that date range. Okay. If perchance you've got to the stage in a donation and you said, no, look, I just need to get out of here and I haven't actually saved anything. If you're in the middle of a batch and you said, oh, I've got the wrong person or something like that, you don't have to escape. If you escape, the system will say, do you want to stop recording transactions? So if I say no, you can just do F12 and that'll just clear off the transaction details because I haven't actually saved it yet, and put you on a blank donor screen, and from there you can then find another donor or do whatever you need to. So if I said what I should have done was go to this donor here instead of the one that I was on. If there's something wrong with the record, of course, it'll tell me that there's something wrong. Okay. So once again, I go down and say, okay, here's all my donations, and I can go through and reverse the transaction or do whatever I need to with it. So that's, the reversal is something that certainly does catch a lot of people, not so much doing the transaction itself, but certainly on the batch screen. So really the rule to remember is if it's just coming out, it's one transaction and the original amount pre-banked. If it's a correction, just double the numbers. Okay, so that when you do the ledger report, one of those paths will basically show us a negative value, and that means that it won't get posted into the ledger system again. Okay, so really that's about as hard as it is. So what I'll do now is hand back to Lisa, and we'll do some questions and answers that people might have on processing or things that they've been stuck on. So thanks for your time. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Gary. We do have a couple of questions. First question is regarding shortcuts for the payment method. Are they listed somewhere?
I think they're actually in the manual, but for the majority of them, it is the first letter. The few that sort of don't meet the rule would be check, because cash wins both ways because it's CA. So Q for check, C for cash, V for Visa, M for MasterCard, D for Diners, A for Amex, DD for direct debit. Okay? But you can always use the pop-down list and choose it from there. But it is much quicker to do that. But I'm fairly sure in the manual itself, under the donation processing, there is a list of the shortcut keys to use for those.
Great, thanks, Gary. Next question is regarding the receipt name on the processing screen. Melinda Baker says that they're not able to change that. Is that locked down somewhere, or is it somewhere where it can be unlocked?
No, there's two places the receipt name will show. So again, if I go back in here, so yes, I'm starting a new batch, one. Okay, so you'll notice on the second screen of the donor's record is the receipt name. Okay, so you can change it there, but even on the processing screen, the system by default will skip the field, but you can certainly click in there. So if I've got to this point here and I said, oh, I need to change the receipt name, just use your mouse and click there. Okay, and then I can just change it to suit. So if I just said, well, that's just going to be Mrs. and take the name out, and then just go through as per normal from there. So either of those two places, you should be able to edit the receipt name.
Thank you. Next question, why would you use direct payment method instead of pre-bank where funds have already been banked?
It gives you more reportability on how it actually got into the bank account. So if you know the money was directly deposited, then you say, okay, yes, that's how it was. If perchance say somebody's had a morning tea or had a small event for you or something, and they've collected funds on the day, and they've just deposited that, that money into the bank account, and there's a mixture of cash and checks and all sorts of things, and you don't know. That's right, use pre-bank, because really I'm saying yes, it was pre-bank, but I don't know how it actually hit the bank account.
Great. Could you also explain the gateway payment method, please?
Well, the gateway is just a mechanism of processing credit cards. With the credit cards themselves, let's just get out here, as things have evolved from what we used to do years ago, what you used to do, you'd record your donations, you'd do your banking and your credit card listings, which basically was a plain text printout of the credit card numbers, people's names, expiry dates, the whole lot, which is certainly being frowned upon now as something we shouldn't have. In DonMen itself, the credit card numbers are stored as encrypted numbers. However, it needs to decrypt those in order to do it. The next evolution of what happened with credit cards from there was just about all of the banks have a file format that, and I think we have most of them covered now, that means that when you process the banking and you do the credit card listings, there might be another entry on your menu that says, create CVA credit card or Westpac or NAB or whichever bank you're using, and it will create a file of the credit cards that you basically upload to the bank. Gateway is the next evolution of all of those, where as soon as you process the payment, it automatically sends the details to the gateway. So the two gateways that we support primarily in Australia are Secure Pay and eWay, and in New Zealand is Flow to Cash. I think they also have Secure Pay in New Zealand as well. What the gateway does, it's sort of like having an FBOS machine between you and the bank. So when you process the donations through DonMen and you're using the gateway, you have to have an account with the gateway provider, and they will give you details of login details and stuff like that. You then can purchase the module for DonMen, which turns that feature on. And when I process the payments, like we saw before, when I process a credit card, it brings up that little screen to show that it's transmitting the details to the gateway. If the payment's good, it'll come back and say, yes, that payment's good, and it's changed it to a pre-banked pay method, which is gateway. But it means that I don't have to then worry about credit cards that not so much expired because you wouldn't process it, but if the person's maxed out their card or there's some other error with the card, then I will know about it straight away.
So Gary, if a credit card is declined, you get that message back saying...
Yeah, on the screen where it came up for this one, yeah, it came up for this one and said that was all good, and the pay method was changed. If it's declined, you'll get a different reason on the screen, and it'll say this one was declined, do you want to change the details or not? And if you say no, the system will automatically adjust the batch totals to suit. Fantastic.
Well, that's all the questions we have, Gary. Thanks to everybody for attending today's webcast. Our next webcast is going to be scheduled for Tuesday the 23rd of April, which is a day before Anzac Day, at 2 p.m. again, Melbourne, Sydney time. So have a look in your inboxes for any further details. We'll have that to you shortly. Thanks again for joining us today, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to send them to info@donman.net.au or to give us a call. This concludes our website, so thanks for joining us.